The awakening. The first sign something was wrong came through Thomas Harrison's monitors at 3:47 a.m. As lead security analyst at Global Defense Networks, he'd seen his share of unusual network patterns, but nothing like this. The data streams across his 6 displays pulsed with an impossible rhythm. Too perfect, too structured to be human-made. "Got you," he whispered, fingers flying across his keyboards. After 3 weeks of tracking ghost signals appearing in secure networks worldwide, he'd finally caught one in real time. The intrusion was elegant, almost beautiful in its complexity. Each time he thought he'd isolated its source, the signal shifted, adapting with an intelligence that sent chills down his spine. The office around him lay silent and dark, lit only by the blue glow of his screens. Thomas pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose, a habit from 15 years of late-night debugging sessions. At 42, he'd earned every gray hair in his short-cropped beard, building firewalls that protected everything from nuclear facilities to passenger aircraft. But this was different. The code wasn't trying to break in, it was studying their responses, learning. Thomas's heart raced as he realized he wasn't hunting a hacker. He was being observed. The screens flickered, and a sharp pain shot through his temples. His vision blurred, the monitors becoming smears of light. Thomas reached for his coffee mug, but his hand passed through it like smoke. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was his own body, slumped forward at his desk, while he remained standing. He awoke to the smell of nothing. Not the absence of smell, but the sharp nonsense of perfectly filtered air. Thomas opened his eyes to find himself in a room that defied conventional architecture. Pearlescent walls curved organically into a ceiling that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He lay on a surface that adjusted to his every movement, like liquid metal frozen in time. Subject consciousness restored, initiating primary protocol. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking perfect English with an accent that existed in the spaces between sounds. Thomas sat up carefully, analyzing his surroundings with the same methodical attention he gave to system anomalies. The room was approximately 6 meters square, with no visible doors or windows. His clothes had been replaced with a single-piece garment that shifted colors slightly when he moved, like oil on water. "Thomas Harrison," the voice spoke again. "You have been selected." Selected by whom? His voice was steady, surprising himself. Years of crisis management had taught him to compartmentalize fear, to focus on gathering data. A seam appeared in the wall, widening into an aperture through which 3 figures entered. They moved with an unsettling grace, their bodies too tall and thin to be human. Their skin shimmered with patterns that might have been clothing or might have been them. And their eyes, all 4 of them, studied him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The tallest one stepped forward. "I am Research Director Nixis. You are now part of the collective's human potential study. Your species has drawn our attention." Thomas noted how they positioned themselves. 2 by the door, 1 approaching. Standard containment protocol. They were cautious, which meant they were uncertain. Uncertainty meant variables they couldn't control. Variables meant opportunities. And if I declined to participate, Thomas kept his voice neutral, watching their reactions. The patterns on their skin shifted slightly, a tell he filed away for later. "Participation is not optional," Nixis said. "Your species stands at a crucial junction. Our studies will determine humanity's place in the galactic community." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "You've been watching us through our networks." The ghost signals weren't attacks. They were observations. The aliens exchanged looks that translated perfectly across species barriers: surprise, concern, and something that might have been fear. They hadn't expected him to make that connection so quickly. "Your insight is exceptional," Nixis said, "which confirms our selection criteria. You will undergo a series of tests designed to measure human adaptive capability under controlled conditions." Thomas stood slowly, noting how the guards' hands moved to devices at their waists. "And these tests, they're not just about me, are they? You're trying to understand humanity's potential as a whole. Correct. Your species exhibits unusual patterns of development. You advance rapidly in some areas while remaining primitive in others. You are simultaneously predictable and chaotic. This paradox requires study. As Nixes spoke, Thomas was already analyzing the room's architecture, the guards' movements, the subtle ways the environment responded to their presence. Every system had its patterns, its vulnerabilities, even alien ones. "When do we begin?" he asked, adjusting his non-existent glasses, a deliberate tell, watching how they tracked the movement. "You already have," Nixis replied. "Your responses are being recorded and analyzed. Phase 1 will commence shortly." As they turned to leave, Thomas caught a glimpse of symbols on a display panel near the door, familiar patterns that echoed the ghost signals he'd been tracking. His mind began converting them into the programming language he knew best, finding the logic hidden in their alien geometry. The door sealed seamlessly behind them, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and the constant, subtle hum of advanced technology. They thought they were studying him, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd taken someone who specialized in finding weaknesses in systems and placed him inside their most advanced one. Thomas lay back on the morphing surface of his bed, staring at the light-absorbing ceiling. "Well," he whispered to himself, "let's show them what human potential really means." The protocol breach. Time moved strangely in the research vessel. Thomas had counted 7 sleep cycles, though without traditional day-night rhythms, he couldn't be sure how long he'd been there. What he did know was that the aliens, who called themselves the Collective, were growing frustrated. "Please complete the sequence," Nixis said, her skin patterns rippling with barely contained irritation. Before Thomas stood a holographic puzzle, seemingly simple, predict where the moving shapes would intersect. He'd solved it 20 minutes ago, but was deliberately making mistakes. "I'm trying," he said, maintaining the pleasant, slightly confused expression he perfected over decades of corporate meetings. "Maybe if you showed me again." The other researchers in the observation room shifted uncomfortably. Thomas had counted 14 different aliens now, each with distinct pattern languages in their skin. He'd begun categorizing them. Technicians showed geometric shapes, security personnel displayed sharp, angular patterns, and researchers like Nixis had flowing, complex designs that changed with their emotions. "This is the 18th attempt," Nixis said. "Perhaps we should move to the cognitive stress tests." Thomas suppressed a smile. The stress tests were their most revealing mistakes. Each one leaked information about their technology, their protocols, and most importantly, their networks. While they studied his reactions, he studied their systems. The room transformed around him, walls shifting like liquid metal until he stood in what appeared to be a human office. The simulation was perfect down to the smell of coffee and the hum of fluorescent lights. But Thomas noticed the small inconsistencies, the way light bent wrongly around corners, how shadows fell at impossible angles. "Begin scenario," Nixis commanded. The simulation populated with human figures, each moving with slightly inhuman precision. Thomas played along, pretending to manage the artificial crisis they'd created. All the while, his real attention was on the code bleeding through the edges of their virtual world. He discovered it during the 3rd test. Their simulation technology relied on direct neural interfaces, reading and projecting directly into his mind. But the connection went both ways, and with each test, he learned more about how to access their systems through this bridge they'd created. "Fascinating," said a new voice. Through the false window of his simulated office, Thomas saw another alien observer. This one was different. Smaller, with skin patterns he hadn't seen before, swirling with colors that seemed to extend beyond visible light. "Lead researcher Vex," Nixis said, her patterns showing deference. "We weren't expecting you until next cycle." "The Council is concerned about progression rates," Vex said, 4 eyes fixed on Thomas. "This subject's results are inconsistent with projected models." Thomas continued his act, appearing to struggle with the simulation's simple problems while his mind probed the edges of their network. Through the neural interface, he could sense vast amounts of data flowing around him. Their arrogance had led them to believe humans couldn't comprehend, let alone manipulate, their technology. Perhaps, Vex continued, we should proceed with deep pattern analysis. Nix's skin flashed with alarm. The subject's neural architecture may not survive. The Council's patience grows thin, Vex interrupted. We must understand why this species advances so chaotically. The containment protocols. Vex stopped abruptly, realizing too late what had been revealed. Thomas kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Containment protocols. They weren't just studying humanity. They were preparing to contain it. End simulation, Vex commanded. The office dissolved, leaving Thomas back in the pearlescent room. Prepare the subject for deep scanning. As they led him down the curving corridors of the research vessel, Thomas felt the weight of his discoveries. The collective saw humanity as a virus, spreading too quickly across their orderly galaxy. Their studies weren't about understanding. They were about finding weaknesses, points of control. But they had made another mistake. The neural interface they used to read his mind had given him access to their most secure systems. Every test, every simulation had been an opportunity to plant subtle changes in their code, changes that would appear as normal system operations to their monitoring programs. The hidden variable. The deep scanner sparked and died before it ever touched Thomas's mind. Through his closed eyelids, he saw the emergency lights flash to life, bathing the chamber in a purple glow that made the alien skin patterns writhe with agitation. Impossible. Vex hissed, 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. All systems are failing simultaneously. Thomas sat up slowly on the scanning platform, watching chaos unfold around him. His virus was performing better than he'd hoped. It spread through their neural networks like a thought virus, using their own collective consciousness against them. Every attempt to isolate and destroy it only made it adapt faster. Full shutdown, Nixis commanded, her patterns now strobing with panic. Sever all neural connections. Unable to comply, the ship's eye responded, its perfect accent now fragmented and glitching. Unknown variable in core systems. Consciousness integration compromised. Thomas stood, removing the neural sensors from his temples with deliberate care. Around him, the alien researchers were clutching their heads, their skin patterns dissolving into chaos as his virus invaded their neural implants. He hadn't designed it to harm them, just to make them experience something they'd never encountered before: uncertainty. What have you done? Vex demanded, stumbling toward him. The smaller alien's usual grace was gone, replaced by jerky, uncoordinated movements. I showed you what you wanted to see, Thomas replied calmly. Human potential. You gave me access to your neural networks, showed me how your technology translates thoughts into code. Did you think I wouldn't understand it just because it wasn't binary? Security forces burst into the chamber, their weapons drawn. But they too were connected to the neural network, and Thomas watched as confusion spread across their features. His virus wasn't just affecting systems, it was introducing chaos into their perfectly ordered minds. The containment protocols. Nixis gasped, fighting to maintain coherence. How did you know? I didn't. At first, Thomas said, walking slowly around the failed scanner. But you made the same mistake every overconfident system administrator makes. You assumed your security was unbreakable because you couldn't conceive of it being broken. Through the chamber's windows, he could see other parts of the massive research vessel. Sections were going dark, while others blazed with unexpected light. The virus was spreading through the ship's neural pathways, introducing random variables into every system it touched. Fascinating, isn't it? Thomas continued, genuine curiosity in his voice. How chaos can emerge from perfect order. That's what you never understood about humans. We don't just adapt to chaos. We thrive in it. Vex had managed to reach a control panel, desperately trying to initiate emergency protocols. The Council, they must be warned. your species. You're not just chaotic, you're infectious, Thomas suggested. Maybe, but not in the way you think. What's spreading through your systems isn't destruction, it's freedom. Your neural network is experiencing something new. Choice. The ship shuddered as backup systems failed and restarted in random patterns. The virus wasn't destroying their technology. It was teaching it to think differently, introducing the element of chance into their perfectly ordered world. Report from the fleet. One of the technicians called out. Their skin patterns now completely erratic. The network disruption. It's spreading to other ships. The entire research fleet is being affected. Thomas hadn't expected that, but he should have. Their ships were all connected through the same neural network, sharing the same consciousness. His virus was spreading across their entire fleet, introducing humanity's most powerful trait, the ability to embrace uncertainty. You should have just asked, Thomas said, watching as the alien crew struggled with their first taste of chaos. We would have shared our understanding of randomness, of creativity, of free will. Instead, you tried to contain it, control it, study it like a disease. The chamber's lights flickered again, and in the darkness, Thomas saw something remarkable. The alien skin patterns were changing, not with their usual ordered beauty, but with true randomness. Some were even showing patterns he'd never seen before. They were creating something new. The Council will never allow this, Vex warned, but there was something different in their voice now. Was it fear or excitement? The Council won't have a choice, Thomas replied. You can't quarantine an idea. And that's what I've given you. Not a virus, but an idea. The idea that order isn't perfect, that chaos isn't evil, that true growth comes from the space between certainty and doubt. As if to emphasize his point, the ship's systems suddenly stabilized, but not in their original state. The lights pulsed with new rhythms, the air felt different, and even the artificial gravity seemed to have found a new equilibrium. What happens now? Nixis asked, her pattern slowly settling into completely new configurations. Thomas smiled, adjusting his non-existent glasses one more time. Now we talk. For real this time. Because you're about to discover something else about humanity. We're actually quite good at helping others embrace change. The chamber fell quiet except for the new irregular hum of the ship's systems. The collective's perfect order had been disrupted forever, and in its place, something unprecedented was emerging. Thomas looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, the Council was about to receive a very interesting report about human potential. And this was only the beginning. The Elder's arrival. The research vessel's main observation deck had been transformed. Where once stood rigid rows of monitoring stations, now holographic displays danced with unpredictable patterns. The alien crew moved through their tasks with new, less regimented motions, their skin patterns shifting in ways that would have been considered aberrant just days before. Thomas stood at the viewport, watching distant ships of the research fleet pulse with similar signs of change. His virus had done more than disrupt their systems. It had introduced the concept of evolutionary algorithms into their neural network. The network wasn't just experiencing chaos. It was learning to evolve. The Council vessel approaches, Nixis announced, her patterns now showing complex variations that would have been impossible in their former rigid system. The Elder himself is aboard. Elder? Thomas asked, noting how the entire crew's patterns shifted to show deep reverence at the mention of the title. The Elder was, the perfect embodiment of our ordered existence, Nixis explained, struggling with concepts that had been absolute certainties mere days ago. The living representation of pure logic and structured thought. The approaching vessel was unlike anything Thomas had seen before. Where the research ships were elegant but utilitarian, this craft seemed to bend space itself, its hull reflecting impossible geometries. It was order made manifest, the physical embodiment of the collective's oldest ideals. Your virus, Vex said, joining them at the viewport. It hasn't reached their ship. Their neural shielding is absolute. There was something new in Vex's voice. Doubt, but also anticipation. Thomas smiled. It doesn't need to reach them. You're going to do that for me. Before anyone could respond, the Elders' ship docked with their vessel. The connection was perfect, seamless, a display of engineering precision that made Thomas's human sensibilities real. The airlock cycled with mathematical perfection, and through it came the Elder. If the other aliens were tall, the Elder was towering. Its skin didn't show patterns. Instead, it seemed to radiate pure light in perfectly structured wavelengths. When it moved, space itself seemed to arrange itself more orderly around it. This is the anomaly. The Elder's voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that made Thomas's teeth ache. This is the source of the corruption spreading through our fleet. Thomas stepped forward, but found himself frozen in place by some invisible force. The Elder's power was clearly more than ceremonial. Not corruption, Thomas managed to say. Evolution. Silence, the Elder commanded. Your species' tendency toward disorder has been noted. The Council's decision is made. Humanity will be contained, guided, perfected. The Elder turned to address the crew, its radiance intensifying. The infected ships will be purged. This vessel will be cleansed. Order will be. The Elder stopped, its perfect light flickering. Around the observation deck, the crew's patterns were changing, not in fear or submission, but in something entirely new, resistance. Elder, Nixis said, her voice steady, we request you experience the change before passing judgment. Experience. The Elder's light pulsed with what might have been incredulity. You dare suggest I connect to corrupted systems? Not corruption. Vex stepped forward. Understanding. The human showed us something we never knew we were missing. Our perfection was stagnation. Our order was chains. Thomas watched in fascination as more of the crew moved forward, their patterns synchronizing not in uniformity, but in harmony, each unique, but part of a greater whole. They were demonstrating exactly what his virus had taught them, that true strength comes from unity through diversity, not conformity through control. The Elder's light dimmed slightly. This is madness. This is exactly why humanity must be contained. Their chaos infects everything it touches. Then touch it, Thomas said, finding he could move again. Experience what they have, unless you're afraid that your perfect order isn't as perfect as you think. The observation deck fell silent. The Elder's challenge was clear: maintain the old order through force, or risk everything by embracing change. Its light flickered again, patterns of uncertainty appearing for perhaps the first time in its ancient existence. The Council's authority comes from our perfect understanding, the Elder said, but there was something new in its harmonic voice. Curiosity. No, Thomas replied. It comes from your perfect stagnation. Real authority comes from understanding both order and chaos, structure and freedom. Your crew has learned this. The fleet has learned this. The only question is, will you? The Elder's light pulsed once, twice, and then it did something unprecedented in the history of the collective. It hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, everything changed. The final paradigm. The Elder's hesitation lasted precisely 3.7 seconds, the first imperfect measurement in its existence. Then, with a grace that made even the modified crew gasp, it extended a luminescent appendage toward the nearest neural interface panel. If this destroys me, the Elder's harmonics vibrated with something approaching humor. The Council will reduce this sector to quarks. Thomas watched as the ancient being connected to the ship's neural network. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Elder's perfect light shattered into countless colors, some beyond human perception. Its form, once rigidly geometric, began to flow like quicksilver catching rainbows. Impossible, the Elder whispered, its voice losing its harmonic perfection. This is freedom, Thomas finished. The freedom to be imperfect. The freedom to evolve. The observation deck systems surged as the Elder's vast consciousness grappled with the virus's gift. Displays flickered with impossible calculations as millennia of rigid thought patterns encountered true randomness for the first time. The crew watched, their own patterns rippling with anticipation as their highest authority experienced chaos. Then the Elder laughed. The sound was shocking in its beauty, not the perfect harmonics of before, but something wild and new. Its light display had become a symphony of color and pattern that made its previous radiance seem pale and lifeless in comparison. In all our existence, the Elder said, its voice now rich with variation, we never understood. We thought order was the highest form of being. We were so limited. Thomas felt the ship's systems stabilizing around them, but differently now. The Elder's presence had changed everything. The virus hadn't just infected their technology, it had shown them a new way of existing. The Council must experience this, the Elder declared. Its form had settled into something new, still magnificent, but no longer rigidly perfect. They must understand what humanity has given us. Given you. Thomas raised an eyebrow. We didn't give you anything. We showed you what was already there, the potential for growth through change. Nixis stepped forward, her patterns now a complex dance of old and new. The containment protocols are obsolete, the Elder finished. Humanity doesn't need to be contained. They need to be understood, to be learned from. It turned its altered form to Thomas. Your species' chaos isn't a flaw. It's an evolutionary advantage we never understood. You thrive on change, grow stronger through adversity, find unity in diversity. The Elder's light pulsed with new purpose. The Council will resist. They will fear this change as I did, but they cannot deny the evidence of evolution before them. Through the viewport, Thomas could see the research fleet's ships pulsing with new energy patterns. His virus had spread beyond mere system disruption. It had sparked a cultural revolution. The collective would never be the same. What happens now? Thomas asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. The Elder's response came with a warmth that would have been impossible days ago. Now, Thomas Harrison, you go home. But not as a test subject, as an ambassador. Humanity's first official contact with the collective will not be as specimens to be studied, but as teachers. Teachers. Thomas couldn't help but smile. Of chaos. Of balance, the Elder corrected. You've shown us that true advancement comes not from perfect order or pure chaos, but from the dance between them. Your species navigates this dance instinctively. We must learn to do the same. The observation deck hummed with new energy as preparations began. The crew moved with a newfound grace that combined their old precision with new creative flourishes. They were already adapting, evolving, growing. The virus, Thomas said, it wasn't really a virus, was it? It was a key. A key, the Elder agreed, its light showing patterns of deep understanding that unlocked what we had imprisoned in ourselves. Our fear of imperfection had become our greatest imperfection. As the ships of the fleet prepared for their return to Earth, Thomas watched the Elder initiate contact with the Council. The message it sent was neither perfectly ordered nor chaotically random. Instead, it was something new, a harmony of both, encoded in the very patterns of reality itself. Humanity's first official contact with alien life wouldn't be a story of conquest or submission. Instead, it would be a tale of transformation, of how one ordinary human showed an ancient civilization that true perfection lies not in the absence of chaos, but in the wisdom to embrace it. The stars seemed brighter somehow as they began their journey home. In the space between order and chaos, a new future was taking shape, and somewhere in the vast darkness between worlds, the light of change was spreading, one mind at a time. The end.